Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today. As Anya said, my name is Mati, and for the ones who don't know me, I'm part of the Condens team as a customer success manager. Today, we are here to talk a bit about research taxonomies or research repository taxonomies. But before we start, I actually wanted to briefly say that as also like Max mentioned in the last coffee chat, the concept of this event is not to give a lecture, in this case about taxonomies, but rather to create a starting point for a bigger conversation. I think that although research repositories have been around for a while now, for many the topic of taxonomies still feels like a whole new world with many areas to explore. And on one hand, this can open up many possibilities and be very positive, but on the other hand, it can also generate some confusion. So I think it is important to open these topics of conversation, share ideas, share tips, but also to understand that each organization and each research team has to find their own approach and their own specific structure that best suits their needs. Okay, with that being said, then let's jump right into the first part of the coffee chat, which is a little introduction to research repository taxonomies. We are going to talk about what is a taxonomy, what role it plays in the repository, and also what challenges one can encounter when building it. So first of all, what is a taxonomy? Although there is no exact definition for a taxonomy within the context of a research repository, we can take close definitions and adapt them to this case. Nielsen-Norman Group defines taxonomy in the context of UX as a closed list of acceptable terms that are arranged hierarchically and are used to describe and classify content. It's basically a planned way of adding descriptive metadata to content so it can be retrieved effectively. If we focus now more on a granular level of what this means for a research repository, in Condens, we will define it simply as a system of terms and structures that establish how you categorize and organize your data within the repository. Okay, but why does the taxonomy play such a fundamental role in the repository? Well, a useful research repository enables researchers and stakeholders to quickly find relevant information, and how data is organized can either streamline or complicate this process. A research repository with an effective taxonomy supports first the data analysis, enabling teams to quickly find insights from past studies, to answer questions quicker with less effort and more precisely, to connect evidence across projects. Hi there. And to build more robust outcomes. We have already started, but no worries, it was just the first few minutes. Then a research repository with an effective taxonomy will also extend the reach and value of research by giving stakeholders an easy path to find all kinds of insights. And as a consequence of this, it will also drive customer-centric and evidence-based decisions in the organization by democratizing the access to research and creating an easy-to-use system for finding insights that are always backed by evidence. But building an effective taxonomy is not always a simple task, and different challenges may arise during the process. So first of all, building a taxonomy requires an investment of time and effort, especially at the beginning. Of course, it's also possible to start using the repository directly without setting up the taxonomy first, as well as for some teams or for some solo researchers with a simple structure, creating the taxonomy might be an easy task. But in most cases, it is completely normal and it's worth investing some time and effort in this process, as it will improve the long-term success and efficiency of the repository. Second of all, there is no standard taxonomy that fits all repositories, unlikely. A taxonomy that works great for a company might not make sense at all for another. Each organization and each research team is different, and therefore each taxonomy is unique and specific to its repository. Of course, there will be parts of the taxonomy structure that some companies might share, for example, research agencies or software companies, and there are taxonomy examples, models, and frameworks that can be taken as a reference. But in the end, each organization and each team should think about what needs and goals they want the repository to meet and adapt, therefore, their taxonomy to those ones. And third of all, building a taxonomy can also sometimes feel like a complex puzzle to unravel, And again, especially this happens at the beginning. For example, trying to meet the needs and expectations of all the users of the repository, finding the right number of tags, finding the right naming for those tags can mean some of the difficulties that may arise during the process. Because of this complexity, you will probably have to test the taxonomy for a while and apply changes until you find the best structure. This is also why it is recommended to choose a repository tool that gives you flexibility in modifying your taxonomy along the way. But before moving on to the next part, and also to not scare you off with these challenges, I would like to mention here that these challenges can be solved more easily or will not even feel like challenges with the help of two factors. The first one is having a research ops or a person or a small group of people dedicated to leading this process of the taxonomy creation. Of course, all researchers can contribute to the taxonomy creation at some point in the process, but especially in bigger teams, it definitely helps having someone in charge of guiding this process. And the second factor is, if possible, also having some customer support or some sort of guidance from the repository tool that you choose. Having someone specialized or having some documentation to guide you through how the taxonomy works, to solve your questions and to give you some feedback maybe on the first taxonomy drafts can definitely help in making this process easier and smoother. Okay, but now what means taxonomy in Condens, or how does it work? How can it be set up? In Condens, taxonomy is formed by 4 dimensions: the project information fields, the participant information fields, the global tags, and the artifact information fields. Each one of them affects the search in a different way, and therefore understanding how they work both separately and in combination is key to making the best out of the repository. Let's start with the project information fields. This is the area in Condens where you will apply metadata on a project level. The values that you add in these fields will be associated with all the research that is within a project, and this dimension will allow you, therefore, to keep your projects organized. Some examples of these fields could be the product area or the products if you work in a multi-product company, the country or the region if you operate in different areas, or maybe the research method. The second dimension that we see here is the participant information fields, and this is the area where you add metadata related to the participants you conduct the research with. Here you can add 2 different types of data. On one hand, you can add, if you are allowed to, personal information like the email, the telephone number, or the full name. But you can also add attributes like the job role, the industry, the user segment, and basically any field that you think might be valuable for you when sorting through information later on, either for recruitment purposes because you are trying to search for a specific type of participant, or to do some clustering with raw data, some data segmentation, and maybe see if there are any behavioral or persona patterns. The next dimension will be the global tags. This is the metadata that you apply directly to the raw data. And the main purpose of this dimension is to allow you to connect evidence across projects and to save unrelated findings for the future or out of scope moments. What do we mean with these out of scope moments or with saving unrelated findings? Well, imagine that you are doing research about a specific topic, let's say about a specific user journey stage, and a statement during an interview but is related to another stage. Even though it might not be relevant for you at that moment, it might not be relevant for the project that you are involved, it could be useful in the future, either for you or for someone else when they are doing research about that specific stage. Tagging this data with a global tag will ensure that the information is collected and is available for any future research on that future user journey stage. Some other examples of global tags here could be feature requests, issues, or, for example, pain points. And lastly, but not least important, we have the artifact information field. This is the metadata used to categorize your artifacts. In Condens, to give you a little bit of context, if you are not very familiar with the different parts, an artifact is a research outcome. It can be the shape of a report, it can be the shape of a finding, an insight, or even an affinity map. We provide some templates, but you can also create your own templates and create your own kind of shape of research outcome. So coming now back to these artifact information fields, you can think of them as a powerful way to structure and label your research outcomes. Some examples of these fields could be the user journey phase, the user segment, or maybe the intended audience of this artifact. 2 remarks on this before we change to the next topic or the next part will be, the first is to note that some of these dimensions also affect how stakeholders search for information in their view of the repository. I'm talking about a stakeholder here as anyone who wants to have access to insights, but cannot have or should not have access to the raw data. This gives the researchers the possibility of, or the advantage of being able to organize the outcomes in a way that will make it easy for stakeholders to find them, since they are in charge of setting up these dimensions. And the second thing that I wanted to mention here was that these dimensions work also in combination. So for example, you can use the global search to see all the artifacts related to 2 specific project and artifact information fields in combination. Or you could go into a global tag and you could segment data by participant information. The concept and this dynamic gives you multiple options to share, to search and to find information quicker and faster. Now, okay, we know more or less how the taxonomy works in Condens, but how do we build a taxonomy, and especially how do we build it from scratch? Well, we have gathered some resources that we think can be of great help in this process, maybe not only if you are building the taxonomy with us in Condens, but also in general. The first one will be having a good onboarding process, or having access to resources on the chosen repository platform is fundamental to being able to create a good taxonomy. Understanding how the different dimensions or areas to add metadata work, how they can be created, how they can be modified, how they affect not only the researchers but also the stakeholders are definitely key steps prior to the building of the first taxonomy draft. Secondly, we believe that it's important to understand and define the needs and expectations of the future users of the repository before designing the actual taxonomy. For this reason, we have created a series of practical exercises to do with your team and create the groundwork to start building the taxonomy. In these exercises, we help you to discover in depth what terms, areas, topics, structures, and in general, what should be included or reflected in this taxonomy. We also help you to find what are those needs of the different users or the different roles in the repository or in the research repository. And we provide kind of a map or a schema where to connect all of this information to the respective dimensions. You can do these exercises on your own, or if you are already a customer of ours, then you also have the option of doing them together in an online workshop. The third resource that we believe can be valuable here is having access to taxonomy examples. The concept is not to copy exactly those examples, because as we said, each taxonomy is unique to their team, but rather to use them as a source of inspiration when getting started, or maybe also after creating the first draft as a way of checking if something is missing. Of course, it's not always possible to have access to examples from other researchers, maybe because they cannot share externally the taxonomy structure, or because there is not enough information out there. And this is why we have created in Condens a series of examples based on our research and on the best practices that we have collected over the years. And in these examples, we will show you some categories, and also we will provide some context of why we present those categories that often we saw that they work for our customers, and that we will also hope that they will help you, or that at least that they will give you some inspiration. And lastly, we have the experts guidance. This is closely related to what I mentioned earlier about the challenges and how this process is simplified when you have access to good customer support. This does not mean that the process of creating the repository cannot be done without help. In fact, we have many teams that have created the taxonomy on their own, and it works perfectly well for them. But having someone on the repository side who can answer your questions, who can guide you, and who can give you feedback whenever you need it, definitely speed up this process. And of course, I must say that at Condens, we believe in this sort of quality support, and therefore we also try to provide it. And lastly, we have created a series of principles, those ones that Anya also mentioned at the beginning of the call. These ones are based on best practices again, and of some years of learning and on working together with closer with the customers. And these principles are useful, especially to keep them in mind while you are developing your taxonomy as a sort of kind of backup idea or background. Here, I'm going to summarize them briefly, but if you want to read the extended version, then we can, of course, send you the full document. The first principle is balance, ease of use, and level of detail. A more granular taxonomy allows for a more granular research or search within the repository, but it also requires more effort for each individual to choose between the correct values and also for the entire team to align. Bear in mind that there is a trade-off between ease of use and level of detail. Although it is normal that for the taxonomy to become complex, the larger the repository gets and also the bigger the team is. But at the beginning, when you're starting to create the taxonomy, we definitely recommend keeping it simple, and if needed, then scale it with time. And also something to keep in mind here is that it's okay if your taxonomy doesn't cover each possible and single scenario that a researcher or a stakeholder will come up with. Of course, you want to try to cover most of them, but focusing on covering all of the possible scenarios might not be helpful here. Then the second one will be the right taxonomy dimension for the right purpose. We mentioned it earlier, but again, learning how the dimensions work and finding the best structure for your data in the repository will open up a whole world of possibilities to improve and streamline not only the data analysis, but also the search for insights by stakeholders. Knowing how the dimensions work will definitely empower the repository usage. The third one will be a taxonomy is in a constant state of change. We always say that taxonomies are living, breathing organisms and that will change over time. And this doesn't mean, of course, that drastic and major changes must be applied constantly. The goal of the taxonomy is also to provide some long-term structure and stability to the repository. But when we talk about taxonomy in a state of change, we mean that just as the UX team and as the organization progress, learn, and evolve, the taxonomy must also do so to adapt to its users and to their needs. Therefore, we recommend reviewing the taxonomy periodically, for example, every 3 or 4 months. The fourth principle will be start with the user. Often the hardest part, as you also notice in this presentation, is the beginning, when you start creating this taxonomy. And you will see that as you progress, it will become easier to choose which terms to include, to decide in which dimension they fit best. But you might wonder if you are at the very beginning, okay, but where do I actually start? Well, at Condens, we usually recommend starting with the users and especially with the end users. While you and the researchers may be the main users of the repository, colleagues from design, from product management, or from other departments might also be interested in retrieving information from it. Therefore, thinking about the needs of all the users to find information in this repository will most likely lead you to the first set of categories. And actually, the exercises that we created, the ones that I was mentioning earlier, to help you creating this taxonomy, we also included some sessions that you can have with your stakeholders to collect this sort of information and then apply this feedback to the different dimensions and categories. Then the fifth one will be overlaps and duplications are okay, although it is advisable to try to not have an excessive number of categories within your taxonomy. Having some overlaps and duplications is completely normal and sometimes beneficial. To understand this better, I think we can use the example of a multi-product company. For example, creating a project information field for product will allow researchers and stakeholders to search outcomes, for example, by the different products. But having it as a global tag will also enable researchers to connect product evidence across different projects. So in this case, you can see that having an overlap is valuable, as it will benefit from both advantages, and it wouldn't force you to kind of say, okay, we don't have this advantage, we only focus on this other one. Of course, we still recommend trying to find the best dimension for each term and not only making these duplicates when it's necessary, but keeping in mind that the taxonomies don't need to be mutually exclusive can definitely help in this process. And the last one will be saying that sometimes creating guidelines and templates can definitely help getting the team aligned. We also know that each team and each researcher may do research in their own unique way, but creating some templates or some sort of guidelines on how to use the taxonomy can help, again, align this team. This will not only improve and streamline the analysis, but also the creation of the outcomes and the organization of the repository in general. And in Condens, you can achieve this from multiple features, for example, by creating session templates, project templates, or even artifact types. And that will be pretty much all from my side. Thank you for listening. I'm excited to see what opinions come up, what questions you have, and to keep the conversation ongoing and to see how we develop the topic more and more. Thanks a lot.